Welcome to this video about an introduction to executive functioning difficulties. What is executive function? Executive function is a set of mental skills that include working memory, inhibition, emotional control, flexible thinking, and self-control. Executive function skills provide critical supports for learning and development. We use these skills every day to learn, work, self-monitor, prioritize tasks, and generally manage daily life. Most classrooms work by expecting pupils to pay attention, wait their turn, put up their hand, plan how to complete their work, organize themselves, and behave appropriately. These tasks all require executive functioning. We are not born with fully developed executive functioning skills, but have the potential to develop them over our lifetime. This can be a significant area of challenge for many pupils with SEN, especially pupils who are neurodiverse. Types of executive functioning difficulties. Pupils with SEN, including those pupils with a neurodiverse profile, for example, autism, ADHD, and specific learning difficulties such as dyslexia and dyspraxia, may experience varying levels of difficulty in the following 8 main types of executive function. Inhibit, working memory, organization of materials, shift, plan, initiate, emotional control, and monitor. For each of these executive function types, we will look at the signs and strategies to address areas of difficulty. Signs of executive functioning difficulties. Inhibit. This is the capacity to stop and think before doing something, including the ability to resist an impulse and think through a situation and appropriately stop a behavior at the appropriate time. Signs of difficulties in this area include calling out, talking over others or interrupting the teacher, difficulties stopping an inappropriate action, for example, talking during quiet times, rocking on their chair, or getting up during a task. Difficulties ignoring distractions around them. Not being able to think of the consequences before acting, for example, understanding cause and effect. And not being able to regulate their behavior, for example, not being able to walk away from a difficult situation or stop themselves from doing something. Strategies for Inhibit. Try these strategies. Provide clear visual reminders of expectations. Use subtle cues to remind the pupil of expectations. For example, place a hand on the desk to prompt returning to a work task. Limit distractions where possible. For example, working in a quieter space, partnered with calm peers, and limiting the items on their desk. Allow for short movement breaks, including providing the pupil with small jobs to do. Avoid or modify expectations around activities that require multitasking, that is, going back and forward between different activities. Encourage self-talk if they find it helpful to keep on task. Model whole body listening, waiting and turning. And prime the pupil before situations where you see impulsive behavior, including role play of what to do in certain situations to make the behavior easier to do in the moment. Signs of executive functioning difficulties. Shift. This is the ability to move freely from one situation or activity to another. This involves shifting between different thinking processes or skills within a task. Signs of difficulties in this area include feeling stuck on one activity or part of a task, finding it difficult to accept a different way to solve a problem, not being able to easily move from one activity to another, using one approach to a problem with all problems even if it's not appropriate, repeatedly replaying difficult interactions in their mind, being upset by a change in plans, not being able to switch gears in line with different task demands, and struggling with various types of transition. Strategies for shift. Try these strategies. Implement consistent routines supported by visuals. Ensure that the pupil has sufficient time to move between activities, clearly signalling the change with a visual or verbal countdown. If there is going to be an unexpected change in the pupil's day, try to prepare them for this by explaining or using visual supports in advance. Use visual timers to help prepare a pupil for transition. help the pupil plan out how long activities might take, and model and support the pupil to make and use simple checklists to outline the steps needed to complete a task before moving on. This can include the use of task management tools. Signs of executive functioning difficulties: emotional control. This is the ability to recognize and regulate emotions, for example, frustration, worry, anger, and upset, in order to achieve the goal we have set. Signs of difficulties in this area include shutting down, big or disproportionate reactions to seemingly small triggers, becoming angry, upset, or dysregulated very quickly, moving quickly from one emotion to another, demonstrating fight, flight, and freeze behaviors, for example, running out of the classroom, becoming very stuck, or being physical in their response, finding it hard to calm down after an emotional response, and reacting quickly or strongly to peer disagreements. Strategies for emotional control. Try these strategies. Use an antecedent behavior and consequence ABC chart to notice patterns of what might trigger emotional reactions in the pupil, and where possible, try to minimize or preempt these. Use the zones of regulation and 5-point scale approach to help the pupil to recognize how they're feeling and to set strategies for how they can self-regulate linked behaviors. Allow the pupil to use time out so that they can step away from a task or situation, and enable the pupil to use regulating activities, for example, mindfulness, deep breathing, coloring, etc. Signs of executive functioning difficulties: initiate. This is the ability to begin a task or activity and to independently generate ideas. Signs of difficulties in this area include being slow to begin a task or know what to do. They need prompting or adult support to get started, even on a task they're willing to do. Needing to be reminded of instructions several times. Not being able to resist temptations or distractions when expected to get started on a task, and appearing to have not listened to instructions. Strategies for initiate. Try these strategies. Break down big or complex tasks into smaller parts using visuals such as flowcharts or checklists. Use a visual reminder of spoken instructions that the pupil can refer back to. Provide practical demonstrations and modeling. Use sentence starters, story frames, and mind maps. Use forward and backward chaining when providing instructions and modeling activities. Show an example of the final product of a task for the pupil to refer to so that they know when they've achieved it. Use and encourage verbalization to reinforce task demands. And help the pupil understand the clear purpose of the activity related to them personally, and draw upon personal interests to build motivation. Signs of executive functioning difficulties: working memory. This is the ability to hold verbal or visual information in the mind and process this for the purpose of completing a task and being able to stick with an activity. Signs of difficulties in this area include struggling to follow instructions, quickly forgetting answers, difficulty with writing sentences and completing mental math activities, not being able to sufficiently concentrate, especially on tasks with a lot of verbal or written information, being easily distracted by their environment and those in it, needing help from an adult to stay on task, and finding it hard to retain previous learning and build upon it or apply it in new contexts. Strategies for working memory. Try these strategies. Use repetition and rehearsal to reinforce learning. Break down instructions into smaller chunks. Color code key concepts. Provide visual reminders of instructions on the pupil's table. Explicitly link previous learning to new tasks to help a pupil recall and apply what they've learned. Link new learning to personal experiences or interests. Provide the pupil with sentence starters, story frames, and mind maps. Enable the pupil to record their responses in alternative and more efficient ways. Encourage the use of personal memory aids, for example, word banks, posters, charts, number lines, multiplication grids, etc. Provide additional time so that the pupil can meaningfully process verbal informations or instructions, and apply the 5-second waiting rule. And encourage the pupil to develop their own strategies to support their memory. Signs of executive functioning difficulties: plan. This is the ability to anticipate future events, set goals, and map out steps towards these goals. This involves being able to decide what is or is not important to focus on. Signs of difficulties in this area include finding it difficult to plan a piece of work, for example, being able to identify the start, middle, and end of a story, struggling to get their ideas down on paper, feeling overwhelmed by tasks because they cannot see the steps towards achieving the goal or trying to do everything at once, not being able to link actions and consequences, finding it hard to identify the key idea or concept in a piece of work, struggling with setting their own goals and targets, getting caught up in details and missing the bigger picture, and underestimating how long it will take to finish a task. Strategies for plan. Try these strategies. Explicitly teach planning skills. Provide clear, simple timelines for completing tasks. Make steps for tasks short and achievable so that there are regular opportunities to feel achievement. Demonstrate and model what the plan is during tasks. Remove unnecessary information to make it easier for the pupil to notice and process the key information. Ask questions to help the pupil prioritize. For example, what do you need to do and what do you need to start with? Break tasks down into more manageable parts with a clear structure. For example, now and next, first and then, or step ladders. And provide the pupil with planning tools such as checklists, mind maps, and visual timetables. Signs of executive functioning difficulties: the organization of materials. This is the ability to keep their workspace and materials in order. Signs of difficulties in this area include often not having what is needed for a task or activity, regularly losing or misplacing their belongings, leaving their work area in a mess, taking a very long time to get ready for an activity that requires specific resources or materials, constantly restarting an activity from the beginning, and not bringing in homework that they've completed. Strategies for the organization of materials. Try these strategies. Ensure that the classroom is well organized, for example, label containers and areas. Explicitly teach pupils how to organize themselves for learning. Create checklists of necessary materials and equipment, color-coded for each activity. Use visual timetables to help with organization at the start of the day, for example, a picture of different parts of their PE kit that they will need to bring in for PE lessons. And give the pupil an organizational role within the class, for example, handing out and collecting books. Signs of executive functioning difficulties: monitor. This is the ability to check one's performance during or after finishing a task, and to adjust to changing demands. Signs of difficulties in this area include not checking their work for mistakes, being unaware of how their behavior affects or bothers others, not understanding their own strengths and weaknesses, regularly leaving work messy or unfinished, messy presentation of written work, making seemingly careless mistakes, and making the same mistake over and over again. Strategies for monitor. Try these strategies. Support the pupil to develop an internalized script to use so that they can self-reflect following a challenging interaction or task. Use a prompt sheet for checking work. Get the pupil to tick off tasks as they complete them. Ensure that the pupil self-corrects mistakes from a previous task before starting the next task. Get the pupil to create and maintain a book of successes, for example, examples of good work, positive quotes from staff, etc. Facilitate restorative conversations following incidents or difficult interactions, and use the social stories approach or comic strip conversations to support the pupil to understand their own behavior and consequences. Identifying executive functioning difficulties. To identify areas of difficulties with executive function, schools can use an initial executive function checklist. Sometimes further assessments carried out by assessing professionals might be beneficial. Educational psychologists, occupational therapists, and specialist assessors of specific learning difficulties can provide more detailed assessments and specialist advice about executive functioning difficulties. Speech and language therapists may also provide useful advice. This is the end of this video. You can view more videos on this channel in the About series.